Welcome to Power Talks. Despite reaching the heights of technological advancements, the world still struggles with century-old humanitarian crises, man-made disasters, and natural calamities. You are an expert on recovery of natural disasters and conflict. Just last year in August, we had a very sad incident in Nepal. We had the Kosi flood that displaced about 70,000 people in Nepal and a few million in India. Now, with your experience of dealing with tsunami relief, working with President Bill Clinton, where do we find your expertise useful and the UN involvement in the recovery of Kosi flood victims?
Well, I have a number of jobs in Nepal. One of them is as the humanitarian coordinator for the UN system. So when it comes to the emergency response on the international side, not only UN but a number of the big non-government organizations like Save the Children and working with the Red Cross, my role is to make sure that we respond very quickly as a team. So we did that in Koshi, I think, between the World Food Programme and UNICEF and others. We did respond very quickly in support of the government systems, because the government also moved very quickly, I feel, and did a pretty good job. My role, in addition to that, is really to look at how we could have avoided the casualties and how to help the government start to shift not only into an emergency response mode, which it does now, but to also think much more proactively about how to reduce every year the number of casualties.
Because this problem could arise next year as well, with the monsoon coming up.
1,000 Nepalis on average die every year from a natural disaster. The Koshi was an absolute, an example of a disaster that did not need to happen. And it was a man-made crisis, not an act of God. But there are many like it, not nearly as visible as Koshi, which displaced 3 million people in Bihar as well. So it was a very visible catastrophe. But every year, all over the country, from mudslides to floods to food insecurity, there are ways in which this government, with support of its outside friends, can act proactively to reduce the suffering in advance. And that's a whole mindset shift which is now really only starting to take root in Nepal, and that's a big priority for me, is to push that process along.
In 2004, December, there was a tragic incident in Sri Lanka, the tsunami. And as you know, the whole world is facing a lot of environmental threats, rise in the sea level, the global warming. As an expert of environment yourself and dealing with the recovery of tsunami in Sri Lanka, what do you suggest the world to learn from Sri Lanka in dealing with this inevitable disaster?
Yes, as you very correctly pointed out, that tsunami affected Sri Lanka on the 25th December 2004. So that devastated the coastal belt of the country, and nearly 40,000 people were killed, and nearly 2 million, close upon 2 million people are displaced. During that time, I was the Secretary of the Ministry of Urban Development and Water Supply, and I had to play a major role with regard to identification of lands for construction of houses for these people. So therefore, we managed to provide them with permanent housing within a matter of 2 to 3 years. For all the families are settled in villages under permanent roof. So that is how we really recovered the tsunami. But now, when you look at from the environmental point of view, and the coral reefs, they damage coral reefs, and they damage the coastal vegetation. When I was Secretary of the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, so there was a education program for requesting these people not to damage coral reef, and it will be definitely harmful to them, because it's a quick money, you remove coral reefs and then sell it to the tourists, you see. It's a very quick money. But the damage that was done is irrecoverable. What I can say is that I think you have to work as a team in such an occasion. Leave out all your differences, political or otherwise, and you have to work as a team. The political leadership is definitely very, very important. But more than that, the community to work as a team to recover and look after the displaced people is very, very important.
Climate change and global warming are the serious threats that the world will soon have to face. South Asia, being the world's largest populous region, we sense that water crisis might be an inevitable issue or a crisis to deal with. Is SAARC planning anything to deal with this catastrophe?
SAARC has had environment on its agenda of a considerable length of time. And last year we had also a SAARC meeting of climate change ministers in Dhaka. They have developed an action plan. And the action plan essentially is for the member states to implement. It deals with how to cooperate and coordinate strategies to deal with the problem in the international forums. So in all these dimensions of the climate change problem, the SAARC process is engaged, and the ministers have gone back with the SAARC action plan. Action will be in the hands of the governments. The good thing is that all SAARC countries realize the dangers, and there is heightened awareness and consciousness to deal with the problem. So successive SAARC meetings on the subject and the overall charter body meetings, they deal with this issue.
How do we differentiate between the displaced population and those who are termed to be a refugee?
The words displaced people and refugees are often used interchangeably by the public and by the media, but there is a difference. Refugees are defined in an international convention, the 1951 Refugee Convention, and refugees are people who've left their country, which means they're outside their country, for reasons of persecution, human rights violations, serious human rights violations, for reasons of political opinions, race, ethnicity, religion, etc. So it's a clearly defined definition. Displaced persons can cover these people, but it can also cover other notions. It can cover internally displaced, which means people who may also have, for human rights violations, been displaced within their country and not crossed over border. And it can also be economic displacement, like migrant workers who are going abroad.
UNHCR played an instrumental role in Sri Lanka's recovery from tsunami disaster. Post Sri Lanka's war against LTTE, how is UNHCR preparing to help the large number of internally displaced civilians?
Indeed, you're right that UNHCR contributed to the recovery after the tsunami, but UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, has been in Sri Lanka since a long time. We opened an office there in the late 80s, and we've been helping with displaced populations ever since. And the most recent displacement that we've been witnessing, UNHCR has been helping the government in actually assisting the refugees, the displaced populations, in some 40 sites, I think all over northern and eastern Sri Lanka. And it's about 300,000 people that are there. The main focus of our work has been in trying to enlarge the place where the people are, sort of having more land available, decongest the places, providing assistance, and also focusing on the most vulnerable people, the women, the children, those that got separated during the flight from their families, making sure that these people sort of are reunited. And we're working with the government now on more freedom of movement. We hope that these people will be able to return very quickly to their initial villages, and we'll be working with the communities to rebuild the houses and make sure that the communities can return to where they come from.
In a similar fashion, Pakistan government had to deal strongly against the Taliban terrorists who occupied Swat Valley. As a result, Swat Valley's migration is the largest one after the 1947 partition. Is there any plan for UNHCR to take the supports to Swat Valley as well?
UNHCR has been very active in Pakistan for many years because, as you know, there's been a large population of Afghan refugees, but more recently with the earthquake, UNHCR has been helping the government. And we've now witnessed one of the greatest population displacements, of modern times, as you've said. There's about 2 million people now who are displaced within Pakistan. Pakistan is displaced within Pakistan. It's about 1.5 million of the recent displacement and 500,000 of earlier displacement already some months back. So about 2 million people are in need of assistance. And over 160,000 people are now living in camps, while the rest are staying with host families, with friends, or in public buildings, in schools, in different locations. But this population is increasing every day because those who initially helped them, sort of by giving them shelter in their homes, cannot sustain that either because they themselves are affected. So UNHCR has been very active in trying to work with the government. We have had a presence there for a long time, as I've said, with a big presence. But it is very difficult also the situation because it's such a large movement that has happened in such a short time to address all of the needs of these people. The climate's not helping. It's extremely hot, so people who are staying in camps, we need to address, so their needs for water, additional water, but also shade, sort of some privacy. And we have brought in a lot of new UNHCR staff to help. We work with partners, with other UN agencies. There's also a security element. As you may know, the UNHCR head of office of Quetta was abducted at the beginning of the year in January and released in April. And we unfortunately have lost a colleague from the emergency team in the blast that happened at the hotel in Peshawar on Tuesday night. So security itself kind of makes it at times very difficult for us to deploy as many staff as we would need. Resources is obviously another issue. And we are sort of appealing for funds, to deal with this massive displacement. The High Commissioner himself came to Pakistan mid-May to look at the situation and to raise awareness and to raise funds.
In South Asia, especially in Nepal and in India, the issue of Tibetan refugee is a significant one. How has UNHCR recognized the status of Tibetan refugees?
UNHCR does recognize that Tibetan refugees may be in need of international protection. Most Tibetan refugees have found protection either in India or in Nepal, and those governments do recognize some of their rights. Nepal is hosting some 20,000 Tibetan refugees, and all of those who have arrived here before the cutoff date of 1989 have actually been recognized officially by the government as refugees. In India, India continues to give status to the Tibetan refugees and recognizes their rights. So UNHCR only intervenes in those cases where people have not found protection.
Whenever there is a civil war, or whenever there is a conflict of any kind, it's clear that people will be displaced, people will migrate out, refugees will be created. In that context, why does not UN have a mechanism of pre-preparedness?
There's obviously the political level and the humanitarian level. The political level works between government with government, so I will speak about the humanitarian level. At the humanitarian level, there's a lot of contingency planning, preparedness planning, and so on that is ongoing at the level of the UN together with the governments. OCHA, the Office of the Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs, takes the lead in this, but each agency is also very active. UNHCR has a whole section that is emergency preparedness, that trains people to intervene in emergency situations like the one that has just gone, the teams that have just gone to Pakistan. They do contingency planning with governments, way ahead of a crisis that could happen in order to prepare everybody to plan for such a crisis and to intervene, and that is very helpful.
And most of the refugee camps are oddly placed, and in a country like Nepal, which is rich in natural resources with water, we still face water deficit and electricity crisis. How do you reach to the refugee camps with water supplies?
The camps are managed in a comprehensive manner. UNHCR works together with the government to set up the different services, so it's water, sanitation, but it's also provision of health, provision of education. We work closely with the government, and we sign agreements with partners, with national and international NGOs, who actually work on those various aspects and make sure that people are provided the basic services. So water is provided in the camps. We also try to address the needs of the surrounding populations at times. We have an example in Damak in the Baldangi camps where we have now a project that also looks after the water and sanitation needs of the local population, the hosting population that lives in the vicinity, to make sure that they benefit from the same thing. But normally UNHCR, together with its partners, addresses all of those issues within the camp.
During the Maoist insurgency, we had huge population internally displaced. Like in Sri Lanka and in Pakistan, we have lots of Nepalese refugees within Nepal. Has UNHCR looked into this aspect?
Indeed, you have a large number of people who are displaced by those conflict, the conflict here in the country. And UNHCR, together with OHCHR, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and OCHA, has put together a unit that was looking into those issues. The difference here is that the people who were displaced internally did not end up in camps like in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. So it was much more difficult to identify them, to register them, and it was found that very often their needs were very similar to the populations who had not been displaced but were also affected by the conflict. But there was quite a bit of a lobbying going on with the government at the central level and at the local level to actually sort of make sure that the rights of those people were respected. Some guidelines were on IDPs, on internally displaced persons, were adopted by the government. Unfortunately, the directives that would operationalize them are still not adopted at this point. And it seems that many of the persons who were displaced have returned voluntarily to their locations if they wanted to. Others have decided to stay in those locations where they are. These people are not strictly sense of refugees. I mean, they're called refugees, but as they haven't crossed the borders, we wouldn't qualify them legally as refugees. But they're persons who've been displaced. And the UN is aware of that. You know, there's a lot more that has to be done for people who've been internally displaced, and a lot has been done over the last years to kind of address that in a much more comprehensive way. Nepal, in a way, was a pilot in many regards, you know, in dealing with those issues.
Since early 1990s, the issue of Bhutanese refugee has been a major focus for Nepal. Has the current offer of third country settlement proved to be an effective solution?
The refugees from Bhutan arrived in Nepal in the early 90s and have been living in camps in the area of Damak for 17, 18 years with very little hope. I mean, sort of a whole generation has been born in those camps. We're very grateful to the government of Nepal for hosting these refugees when they were in need of protection and for letting UNHCR protect and assist these people. But it's been very difficult, especially for young people who grow up there and don't really see a hope for the future. Unfortunately, the 15 rounds of bilateral talks between the government of Bhutan and the government of Nepal have not led to any major breakthrough, and so far not a single person has been able to go back to Bhutan. So there was 3-4 years ago a core group of donor governments that kind of came together around the resettlement issue and was trying to find a solution to this protracted situation. And they made resettlement offers for Bhutanese refugees to go to third countries. The core group has some of the major countries, major donors to UNHCR, and also major resettlement countries. It's the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and then in Europe, Denmark, Netherlands, and Norway. These countries agreed with the government of Nepal, and Nepal finally agreed to accept third country resettlement. So the option of third country resettlement became realistic after the government of Nepal accepted this in November 2007. And as of March 2008, people have been leaving for third country resettlement. They can apply, and we have almost 70,000 people who've come forward now to declare their interest for third country resettlement. About 14,500 have already left. And the feedback that we get from resettlement countries is quite positive. I mean, those people adjust well, they integrate well, they're educated well, and they manage really quite well. They kind of, after so many years of assistance, are quite capable of taking their lives into their own hands and moving ahead. Some are here who may not want to go, and we very much hope that there will be possibilities for these people to return to Bhutan, that Bhutan will accept to let some of these people go back, in particular elder people who really wish to go back to Bhutan, live there, and die in Bhutan. So our hope is that that may be a possibility. The international community continues to discuss with Bhutan and asking Bhutan to actually open up to this opportunity. But there may also be some people who may just want to stay here because culturally, language-wise and so on, they feel quite comfortable here and they may want to stay and maybe should be given a chance to stay.
Recently we celebrated the World Refugee Day. How has the third country settlement plan for Bhutanese refugees in the U.S. progressed?
I think we're seeing a very successful program underway now. This is largely due to the cooperation of the government of Nepal, UNHCR, and then a small group that's called the core group of countries. But overwhelmingly, the United States has settled the greatest number of refugees, but we have 6 other countries that are involved, and all of us have taken refugees. In the economic downturn, it's a challenge to find and make sure that people have jobs, but I was very heartened last week to see the World Refugee Day presentation that UNHCR made of photographs showing people adapting in the United States. They had jobs, the kids were in school, they had nice houses to live in, and this is quite a contrast to the very stark conditions they've had for the last 17 years in the camps. Not only the physical conditions, but just very very big limits on their dreams and their hopes for a real life. And so I think whether they've settled in Australia or Norway or the Netherlands or the United States, these refugees are beginning a new life now, and particularly for the children, I think this is really very, very exciting. And I think the numbers are up around 19,000 now, with another 74,000 that have indicated they would like to be considered for resettlement. We will be working through those. It'll take a number of years, but we look forward to helping all of those who want to resettle in a third country.
Sooner or later, global water crisis will be a serious issue that the world will have to deal with. For someone who has dealt with climate change issues, now you're dealing with global food crisis. How prepared are you to deal with this upcoming global water crisis?
Well, I think the global water crisis is not something of the future. We are already having to deal with it. And, I don't separate these crises, as I said earlier. To me, the water crisis is very closely linked to the climate and environmental crisis. We don't even talk about climate, we talk about environment. And the reason why we're in this situation is, because we take these things for granted. We assume that this is an unlimited natural resource. Now, that's not the case. We know that very well. And we have to find ways of managing both our land and water resources in an integrated manner. And I think Nepal and South Asia, we have a lot of work to do in this regard. And in fact, a lot of these problems cross national boundaries. As you know, we have a very integrated, interlinked ecosystem in South Asia, and some of the resolution for this problem will have to be found across national barriers. And particularly, you know very well the Kosi River situation, which goes across two countries. If you take the Ganges water situation between Bangladesh and India, we have the same situation. We can't deal with it looking at narrow national boundaries. So, and this is linked. If you connect this with the rate at which ice caps are melting, and the way the Himalayas are being made much more vulnerable with climate change, if we take a narrow approach, we're not going to find solutions. So we have to take an integrated approach which cuts across national barriers. And the second piece, we go back to what I said earlier. The solution for dealing with improved land and water management is not by having a fantastic plan created by the best scientists in South Asia. We need that, but ultimately it's the people who are going to implement these plans. So if you're not involving the people who are living in these places from the beginning, if they don't feel a part of the achievement of this plan, just like if they don't feel a part of achieving the Millennium Development Goals, the goals will never be achieved. So we need, once again, multi-stakeholder. I'm a bit nervous to use these words because they've been abused so much, multi-stakeholder, partnership, etc. But we need a collective solution to a collective problem.
Women trafficking is another serious issue that Nepal has to deal with on a daily basis. And the support of your people and your government in dealing with anti-trafficking programs are incredible. They're very supportive of that. Yet, women trafficking is becoming more widespread and the whole process is becoming more complex. Can we look at upgrading some of the programs that you're supporting and also focus more on the preventive methods that could probably perfectly work?
We've been working on this since the mid-1990s at least. So this is not just because CNN has decided to fight modern-day slavery, but I applaud CNN for doing that. And that's been a cause of theirs over the past year. And it was wonderful to see Anuradha Kerala become the CNN Hero of the Year. That's great. And we've supported Mighty Nepal, and we've given them grants, and we'll continue to support organizations like that. But this has to be a sustained effort. We believe you've got to do all three P's, if you will. You have to do prevention, you have to do prosecution, and you have to do protection as well for those who have been trafficked. And we're trying to work in all three of those areas. And I will say that we've just granted, in fact, the Asia Foundation a $6.8 million award to further advance our anti-trafficking programs. We are working very, very closely with the government of Nepal on every level. I've talked with the Attorney General, because it's important to make the prosecution work effectively as well. And the prevention element is also an important one. For example, the American Himalayan Foundation is doing a good program here, and we're going to be supporting that as well through USAID. And it's a program to keep girls in school, because girls who are in school, who have other opportunities, who are given a good education, are able to resist those temptations and the stories and the lies that they're told that bring them into this process. So absolutely, we are committed to working on all the dimensions of this problem. It's a multidimensional challenge, and we have to approach it multidimensionally as well. We will continue to bring those resources, and I can tell you, for Secretary Clinton, for President Obama, personally, this is an issue that they care about. And for me, it's an issue that I care about. I've got a daughter. I got a granddaughter. If you care about your kids, if we care about the women in our lives that matter, we're going to fight this. And it's not always just women who are trafficked either. We need to fight this issue. And I would just say we need to fight it not only across the border when the women or girls are trafficked to a brothel in India or into domestic servitude in the Middle East, but also in Nepal. And I challenge my colleagues here to be as concerned about the massage parlors and the dance bars and the cabin restaurants as they are about a girl who's sold to a brothel in Bombay.
Most of the time they're minors.
Absolutely. No, this is a huge problem, and I know that for the leadership in my government, it's an important cause, but they feel this personally, morally. This is wrong. And I agree, and this is why we fight it.
Thank you for being with us. We'll be back next week at the same time with another special episode. Till then, good luck and goodbye.